episode 264 of the Working Fans Podcast, and I am on vacation this week. We are bringing you a special put-together episode. I hope it works for everybody. We're trying something a little different. We are going to replay a 5-3-1 from our one-year anniversary, because that was when we did a 5-3-1 on tag teams. So we are going to hear what we liked at that time, who we thought were the top tag teams, and then we are going to go to an AI written tag team history video. That's going to be very interesting. And the following week when I return, I'm going to do my own research on the history of tag team wrestling and see how it compares. And then to close up the episode today, we are going to play another classic 5-3-1 that we did right around the same time, and that was top current tag teams. So it's everything tag teams this week. For these old 5-3-1s, we weren't doing video then, so I'm putting in a little video game footage, and that is this week's experiment. But that is all brought to you by Game Up Hard Hydration. It's like your favorite seltzer and your favorite sports drink got together, had a baby, but it's so much better. Gabe, drop the stats on them.
Baby, it's only 110 calories, low carb, and hey, what about them flavors? We're talking fruit punch, orange, lemon lime, and Joe's favorite, grape. Enjoy yourself some Game Up.
And hopefully you enjoy this episode.
We're going to start with Zach St. John's list. He's got Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, Road Warriors, British Bulldogs, and the Steiner Brothers.
Awesome list, man. I'll pick the Rock and Roll Express out of that list. I think they're like 8-time NWA World Tag Team Champions. I think they've been NWA World Tag Team Champions more than anybody. They've competed everywhere. They're absolutely one of the best teams, and they're still competing to this day. As I said to Ricky Morton when we interviewed him last year, I never thought growing up as a fan of the Rock and Roll Express in the early 80s, I would see him wrestle live. 2019. I got Tim Hartford. He's got the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors on this list, the Dudley Boys, the Freebirds, the Brain Busters, and the Rockers. I'm going to take a little something here from some of the other people on this list. First off, the Dudley Boys. ECW, WWE, the WWE's version of WCW, Impact, and IWTT World Tag Team Champions. Plus, they were All Japan's World's Strongest Tag Determination League champions in 2005. The Dudleys have basically been champions in every major promotion in the U.S. and Japan. This is a good list right there. You have the Freebirds, who are obviously big in UWF in Texas, and then with Jimmy Garvin, they would be tag team champs in WCW. Brainbusters, the Rockers.
Now, my brother brings us our next list. He's got the Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, Rockers, the Young Bucks, Legion of Doom. Obviously, we're going to see Legion of Doom on a lot of lists. You notice my brother has Rock and Roll Express, the Rockers, the Young Bucks. And you can see how almost that wrestling archetype has been passed down through the years. Do you think Matt and Nick will have as long a reign as Ricky and Robert have?
No, just because that I don't think is going to exist anymore. Mike Flynn's list, number one was the Young Bucks. When you consider their impact and their success everywhere, match ratings, merch sales, and being a huge part of the AEW upstart, I think they're the best ever. All right, then he's got the Road Warriors, Edge and Christian, the Rock and Roll Express, and the Hardy Boys. Good to see ENC and the Hardy Boys on that list too, because that's another golden era of tag team wrestling.
And do you think that's why that FTR Young Bucks match is so exciting, or is it just because they've built it up for so long?
I mean, there's no denying, they represent two different things, but that's part of it, right? That's part of the great rivalry. But then what's the other part of the great rivalry? The build. And this is something we never thought we might see, and now it's just a question of when.
Let's bring it up with Scott. He's got the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, the Road Warriors, the Hardy Boys, the Dudleys, and honorable mention, Edge and Christian. We got Jake St. John, author, friend of the show, co-contributor. He's got the Road Warriors, the Rock and Roll Express, who he hates them, but they deserve the spot. Midnight Express, Eaton and Lane, Arn and Tully, Hart Foundation, and the Jake rules in effect. He also has the Dudleys and ENC.
Yes, he does. That's a good combination. You know what? Before I get confused here, let me read off Randy's list. Because he's got the Road Warriors, Edge and Christian, the Rock and Roll Express, and I like this one, the Von Erich and Iron and Tully. Von Erich were a great family, great dynasty. I'm assuming he's talking about the older Von Erich. However, obviously...
Who would be the most obvious tag team of the older one? Is he talking David and Kerry? Is he talking Kevin and Kerry?
Well, that's the thing.
Is he talking Mike and Chris?
Nobody talked about Mike and Chris ever.
Is he talking about Lance and Chris?
Nobody's talking about Lance. I mean, we got the Freebirds on this list too, and we got obviously they're a 3-man team, but you also had Gordy, out part of 3-man team, but we've had Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin. So people throw names out there. The Von Erichs, they're a great 3-man team. You could interchange a lot of them. Maybe not the names Joe mentioned.
I mean, I would almost argue that Ross and Marshall have reinvented the Von Erich idea as a tag team, would you say? Like, when you say Von Erich's tag team, that's who I think of.
When you say the Von Erichs, I still think of the legendary, like, their uncles and father. But Ross and Marshall are really exemplifying that old school style in a new school life. Like, I think they're like MLW's classic in a modern era white meat babyface. Like, they are good. I said this to them in the interview we had, I'm pretty sure. Where, like, when you go back to that old school interview with Kevin Von Erich and something the promo on the Freebird, this isn't Georgia versus Texas. This is decency versus filth. Like, that's what I think of Ross and Marshall. They are the decent human being versus the filth of, like, Contra Unit or something.
Our next list comes from Jesse. He's got the Hardy Brothers. He's got the Motor City Machine Guns. He's got the Road Warriors, the Rockers, and Do It For Her, the team of Seth Rollins and Jimmy Jacobs. We had to look this up before the show. It's a Wrestling Society X team. And a surprising pick, but I will look into them.
I got AJ's list here. He's got the Road Warriors, the Briscoes of Ring of Honor, Midnight Express, the British Bulldogs, and the Rainbow. It was interesting he to include the Briscoes in there.
And I was surprised that it was the ROH Briscoes and Jack and Jerry.
I think he's just trying to keep us on our toes.
The last list I got left is me. I got the Rock and Roll Express, the Steiner Brothers, obviously the Legion of Doom. I went with the Miracle Violence connection. That's Williams and Gordy. And I had FTR, but I had to take them off and put on Midnight Express because I couldn't believe I left them off.
It's a good list, and I want to go right into my list just because I also had Williams and Gordy on my list. Guys, they are 5-time All-Japan Tag Team Champions. That Tag Tournament League in All-Japan I mentioned earlier, I think it's the world's strongest determination league. They were winners of that in 90 and 91. They were the NWA/WCW Tag Team Champions. And I mean, they held both versions of the belt because NWA was actually in WCW at the time. They did an NWA tournament under the WCW umbrella, and Williams and Gordy on both. They were basically the team that came in and kicked the Steiner Brothers' ass, which was never done. Midnight Express are there. The Brain Busters, come on, Iron and Tully were masterful in WWE and NWA. Steiner Brothers are my all-time favorite tag team. They're making the list. I mentioned this in a debate I had with AJ recently that they just were innovator of tag team moves, whether it was the Frankenstein or there was the Bulldog off the top rope that Rick would hit, sometimes off the Scott's shoulders. And then there was also a move, or I don't know if you remember this, Joe, or saw this, they would do on prelim wrestlers. Rick would basically have like a prelim wrestler on his shoulders on the rope. Scott Steiner would climb the top rope, and then DDT, the preliminary wrestler, off of Rick Steiner's shoulders.
Oh, yeah, I believe I'm familiar with that. I've seen it a time or two. Scott Steiner can still hit that Frankensteiner to this day.
Yeah, I want to make sure I don't finish off my list. Number one on all our lists, the Road Warriors, LOD, Animal, and Hawk.
Now that we're going to a top 3, Road Warriors definitely move on.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Who is after them? I see a lot of Midnight Express, a lot of Rock and Roll Express. A lot of Brain Busters.
Well, let me look here, Joe.
You want to do Rock and Roll versus Midnight, and who do we line up for the other spot?
I'm seeing Edge and Christian on a few lists here, too.
Edge and Christian maybe versus the Dudleys?
Okay.
Or how about versus the Hardys? The Hardys are on a few lists.
You know what? Actually, I'll go Dudleys. I think they had more success than other promotions, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're just more of a tag team to me.
So if we're going to pick Rock and Roll or Midnight, who do you pick?
Who do you want to base this off? Who's the best pure tag team? As far as tag team in the ring goes, Midnight Express. As far as, like, success overall, Rock and Roll Express still doing it today, baby. Can't be stopped.
I feel like it's tough. You almost got to go with the Rock and Roll because they're still going to this day. Right. I mean, shit, it's going to be Ricky Morton versus Joey Janela at Joey Janela's Spring Break 4. So, all right, Rock and Roll's got to move on. Sorry, Midnights.
Edge and Christian versus the Dudleys. So I'm not biased. I'm a much bigger fan of Edge and Christian. I enjoyed their work together. But when you look at overall through promotion, the Dudley Boys, man, oh man. I mean, WWE, ECW, Impact, Japan. To me, they move on.
I know, isn't it Conrad who jokes around that they're the most decorated tag team in tag team wrestling? But it's almost
they
true.
So that will be, we're going to have LOD, and then LOD's going around. And let's just talk about it right now. We're competing. The Dudleys and the Rock and Roll Express are competing right now for number 2 here. This is what it is, man. Ain't no doubt about it.
Yeah, and it's not even just that Animal died today, but it was
we had
just...
this list planned out before that, and we asked everybody's listed in advance, and everybody had the Road Warriors on.
Just their impact on tag team wrestling. They were one of the most feared tag teams in a sport that is predetermined. They instilled fear in their opponents because they presented such a real presentation.
How many preliminary wrestlers have spoken and said they didn't want to see their name on the booking sheet against Hamilton Hawk?
As much as I like the Dudleys, I feel like Rock and Roll's got to get that number 2 spot just for how long they've done it. Their spot in the game. They were NWA tag. Yeah, they were NWA tag champs last year.
Rock and Roll's here to stay.
So this is the first time we've done this the opposite way. We picked our number 1, we picked our number 2, and sadly the Dudleys are our number 3.
Not so sadly. They're in great company. Don't cry for the Dudleys boys tonight, all right, folks? This was a great list with a lot of great names.
531. Coming to a more recent time, I took to TikTok and I got some 531 lists from there. Let's go first to Rick Del Santo. He has Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, the Rougeau brothers, the Steiners, the Midnight Express, and the Rock and Roll Express.
First off, I love the diversity of this list. When you're putting teams in that are, or maybe, you know what? Really, the Steiner brothers is the only one that's kind of a little different. They're like the powerhouse team here with great teamwork. But I mean, Rock and Roll Express, Rougeau's, Tully and Iron, Midnight Express, those are all great tag teams, right? Like you might find people on this list sometimes that, oh man, this sounds redundant, but you're a great tag team because you're successful and you have a way of connecting. What I mean by that is all those teams I just mentioned, they're great at the double team maneuvers. I love that list. Joe, you know it. I've said it before plenty of times. I'm a Steiner Brothers guy all day. That's my favorite team. But when I look back at tag team wrestling, the Brainbusters, Iron and Tully are right there. So are the Midnights.
Definitely. Now, the next list is brought to us by Crazed One. They've got the Rock and Roll Express, LOD, Midnight Express, Tully and Arn, and the Killer Bees.
So a lot of 80s tag team wrestling here, which I can relate to. LOD, of course, made that list. And how could you not? And one of the reasons why the Steiners were my favorite team was because they beat the Road Warriors at one point, right? That was just amazing to me. And why was that so amazing? Because there wasn't a team that had that aura like the Road Warriors. They were an unstoppable force. And probably even to this day, probably the biggest true main event real tag team there ever was.
Alex Anderson 600 brings us LOD, Hardys, Dudleys, Hart Foundation, and New Age Outlaws. We're seeing some of the classic teams, but a little skewed newer.
Yeah, went up like another decade. Yeah.
Yo Gabe has the Brothers of Destruction, Dudley Boys, Hardy Boys, New Day, and the Usos.
Okay, now we're going more towards the 2000s and everything like that. You're seeing the New Day and the Usos, who are probably the two most successful teams of what, the last 10 years, maybe longer?
The next list is brought to you by current BCW commentator and member of Not Your Average Marks podcast, John Russell. He has Hardys, Dudleys, Outlaws, LOD, and the Usos.
I say it's interesting that this is the second list now where we're seeing the New Age Outlaws in there. And I only want to bring them up because one of the truly great things about them was, in particular, how they complemented each other. Billy could really get it done in the ring, but the Road Dogg was so good on the mic. And it was two guys that if they never found each other, I wonder if they ever would have had the success. Like tag team wrestling really made those two.
Next list up is from Sexy Bitch 22. Has the Hart Foundation, British Bulldogs, Midnight Express, Demolition, and Gordy and Williams.
Hey, great 80s tag teams again in there. Gordy and Williams probably a little more 90s because they would team up and be more successful in Japan a little later on. I want to say 90, 91 because I know they were in WCW around 92. Bill Watts helped get them in there, I believe, around that time. Yeah, great tag teams all around. Hey, Sexy Bitch, she knows the wrestling, all right? Or he, I don't know.
I'm going to drop another 2 lists on you real quick. We've we've got Bear with the Outsiders, the Usos, New Age Outlaws, Chronic and the Road Warriors, and Black Ops Wrestling has the Steiners, LOD, Hardys, Usos, and the Rock and Sock Connection.
Hey, I'm happy the Rock and Sock made it on because two of the greatest single wrestlers of all time did form for a pretty damn good entertaining tag team.
Yes, and when I talked to Rick Del Santo, he does commentary for wrestling companies on more the western side of the state, and he wanted to shout out a local tag team, House of Pain, which is Nick Payne and Hakeem Ali, and a team called Hustle and Muscle with Jay Bricks and Richard E. Stone. And then that got me talking about two of my favorite tag teams, the Miracle Generation, and then we talked about Waves and Curls, and he was familiar with Trayvon Jordan from before the team started. So it was very interesting to hear, not only from a local commentator, but to get some lists. To give you some perspective, the first time we did this list was in, I believe, October of 2020, and it was the same week that Animal had died. So we had picked LOD as the top tag team. Now we're going to go to a video about tag team history. And then after that video about tag team history, you are going to see a 5-3-1 on current tag team.
Team Wrestling. Today, we're going to take a journey through the exciting and storied history of tag team wrestling. Tag team wrestling has been a cornerstone of professional wrestling for decades, adding a unique dynamic to the sport that combines teamwork, strategy, and high-octane action. From its humble beginnings to its place as a fan-favorite match type, tag team wrestling has a rich history worth exploring. Origins of tag team wrestling. The concept of tag team wrestling began in the early 20th century. The first recorded tag team match took place in 1901 in San Francisco, California. However, it wasn't until the 1930s that the format started to gain popularity, particularly in the southern United States. The idea was simple, yet revolutionary. Instead of a one-on-one match, teams of two wrestlers would compete, with one member tagging out to bring in their partner. This format introduced a new layer of strategy to wrestling. Wrestlers could rest and recuperate while their partner was in the ring, leading to longer, more dynamic matches. The tag team format also allowed promoters to feature more wrestlers in a single match, which was a big draw for live audiences. The Golden Age and Rise of Tag Teams. The Golden Age of tag team wrestling really began in the 1950s and 1960s, particularly with the rise of television as a medium for wrestling. Promotions like the NWA, National Wrestling Alliance, and AWA, American Wrestling Association, started to heavily feature tag teams. During this time, legendary teams like the Fabulous Kangaroos and the Tolos Brothers began to make their mark. The Fabulous Kangaroos, in particular, were one of the first tag teams to achieve widespread fame. With their matching ring attire and synchronized moves, they set the standard for what a tag team could be. The Kangaroos were so popular that they even helped to popularize the use of theme music in wrestling entrances. As we moved into the 1970s, tag team wrestling continued to grow in prominence. Teams like the Andersons and the Blackjacks became household names. The Andersons, known as the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, were a perfect example of the evolving tag team psychology, where teams would work over a single body part to weaken their opponents. Tag team wrestling in the 1980s and 1990s. The 1980s and 1990s are often considered the golden era of tag team wrestling, particularly in the WWF, now WWE, and WCW. This era saw the rise of iconic teams like the Road Warriors, the Hart Foundation, the Rock N, Roll Express, the British Bulldogs, and the Midnight Express. The Road Warriors, known as the Legion of Doom in WWF, brought a new level of intensity and physicality to tag team wrestling. With their intimidating presence, spiked shoulder pads, and aggressive style, they became one of the most dominant and influential tag teams in history. The 1980s also saw the rise of the face versus heel dynamic in tag team wrestling, where good guys, faces, would often be pitted against bad guys, heels. This dynamic led to some of the most memorable feuds in wrestling history, such as the Hart Foundation versus the British Bulldogs and the Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnight Express. In the 1990s, the tag team division continued to thrive. Teams like the Steiner Brothers, Harlem Heat, and the New Age Outlaws kept the tradition alive. The Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudley Boys would later revolutionize tag team wrestling with their high-flying, risk-taking style, culminating in legendary TLC, tables, ladders, and chairs matches. Tag team wrestling in the modern era. Speaker. As we moved into the 2000s and beyond, tag team wrestling continued to evolve. WWE's Attitude Era saw a resurgence in the popularity of tag teams, with the aforementioned TLC matches becoming a highlight of pay-per-view events. Teams like the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudley Boys became synonymous with this era. In the modern era, tag team wrestling remains an essential part of professional wrestling. Promotions like WWE, AEW, and NJPW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, have all placed significant emphasis on their tag team divisions. Teams like the Usos, the Young Bucks, and FTR have continued to push the boundaries of what tag team wrestling can be, combining athleticism, storytelling, and innovation. AEW, in particular, has made tag team wrestling a focal point of its programming, with its extensive roster of tag teams and frequent main event tag matches. The rise of factions, such as the Elite and the Inner Circle, has also brought a renewed focus on multi-man tag team matches, adding new layers of complexity and excitement. Significance and legacy of tag team wrestling. Tag team wrestling has played a crucial role in the history of professional wrestling. It has provided a platform for wrestlers to showcase their abilities in a team environment, allowing for diverse storytelling and in-ring psychology. The format has also given rise to some of the most beloved and influential wrestlers in history, many of whom started their careers in tag teams before moving on to singles success. Moreover, tag team wrestling has been a breeding ground for innovation. From the introduction of new match types, like the TLC match, to the development of intricate team maneuvers and strategies, tag team wrestling has continually evolved and pushed the boundaries of what's possible in the ring. The legacy of tag team wrestling is one of creativity, camaraderie, and competition. It has created unforgettable moments, forged legendary careers, and provided fans with some of the most thrilling matches in wrestling history. Conclusion. In conclusion, tag team wrestling is more than just a match type. It's a fundamental part of professional wrestling's history and culture. From its early days in the 1930s to the high-flying, high-risk style of today, tag team wrestling has evolved while maintaining its core appeal, the excitement of teamwork, strategy, and spectacle. As fans, we've been fortunate to witness some incredible tag teams and matches over the years, and the future looks bright for this beloved aspect of professional wrestling. Thank you all for joining me on this journey through the history of tag team wrestling. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the evolution and significance of this essential part of our sport. I'd love to hear your thoughts and favorite tag team moments, so please feel free to share them as we open up for questions and discussion.
Since I'm on vacation this week, I wanted to try something different and experiment with AI. A lot has been said about AI being used more and replacing real artists. From what I've seen, it can do some things well, and at other times, I feel it has left something to be desired. For this video, I captured some WWE 2K24 visuals, letting the computer play the matches while I used ChatGPT to write a script on the history of tag team wrestling. I got about 7 minutes, so instead of giving my own research on the history of tag team wrestling next week, I'm going to give it this week in response to the AI script. The main part of my research comes from the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Tag Teams, written by Greg Oliver and Steve Johnson. This is a great book that features profiles on numerous tag teams over the years and begins with a section on the history of tag team wrestling. In the tag team edition of the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, 2 books are cited with telling the origins of tag team wrestling. The first is Wrestling to Wrestling, written by Gerald M. Morton and George M. O'Brien. In this book, tag team wrestling is being told as being created in 1901 in San Francisco to liven up the presentation of their shows. However, in Professional Wrestling as Ritual Drama in American Culture, Michael Ball says that Joe Stecker invented tag team wrestling with his brother around World War I. This is all in the lore of pro wrestling, as the first recorded match didn't occur until October 2nd, 1936 in Houston, Texas, according to historian Tom Burke. This early match had all 4 men in the ring, and the match ended when both wrestlers on one side were pinned to a count of 5. It has been in the form that we now know it in a few areas since about 1939. It took off slowly around the United States. Tag team wrestling wildly didn't make an appearance in Madison Square Garden until 1953. One last line I want to include from this book is that they say tag team wrestling really took off with the advent of television. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense that there would be a rise in tag team wrestling as there would be a rise in television watching. Think about the style of wrestling that was most commonplace in the black and white footage that exists today. It's a slower, more technical style than we see today, always striving to be as real as possible. At its most cartoonish, it could be a real kick-punch affair. Now imagine suddenly having 2 men on each team that are presented to you. It must have been super chaotic in the early days when tag team matches more resembled the tornado tag matches of today. When you have a partner outside of the ring waiting to be tagged in, there really becomes a dramatic tension that gets created. And I think it's that dramatic tension that really pulls people in. The book credits Jim Crockett Promotions with being ahead of the game with tag team wrestling since the early 50s. Now, I found this wild because it was tag team wrestling in the 90s. WCW really caught my eye as a fan with all the tag teams they featured. Being from the Northeast, of course, WWE was the wrestling I first became aware of, even though you had teams like the Rockers, Legion of Doom, Demolition, and other tag teams. Tag team wrestling never seemed important in the WWE. Now, when I discovered WCW and saw teams like the Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, and Arn and Tully, this felt like another level of wrestling. The Midnight Express were so quick and fluid with their moves in the ring, while having such a dynamic mouthpiece as Jim Cornette on the outside stirring up trouble. Now, since I've discovered it, I've been a fan of tag team wrestling. As a viewer, I notice it seems to go in waves, meaning that there are times where it's a hot commodity and it is featured prominently weekly, and other times where it can be a downturn and there isn't that universal excitement for it. I think a big part of this is the disregard for the tag team rules. The rules of tag team wrestling really create the perfect boiling point of excitement with 1 man in the ring and 1 man outside of the ring. Each team has that corner with their partner in it, and think about an opponent standing between your favorite wrestler and their tag team partner waiting to tag in, or when your favorite wrestler is being double teamed in the corner, when the referee is tending to the fed up partner that's witnessing attack, further allowing the attack to happen. When those rules go out the window or are more relaxed on a regular basis, the thing that makes tag team wrestling so fun to watch goes away. And then it's just another match with guys on the card. Sorry to get so preachy there for a minute and criticize tag team wrestling, but when I started writing this, I didn't know exactly what I was going to say. I knew I wanted to start with the section from the book and paraphrase the rise of tag team wrestling. I found the evolution interesting, and the book details coattails of being at like a consistent rise, then hitting a dip in the late 70s, resurgence in the 80s, and this got me thinking about how all my favorite tag teams seem to come from different eras. If you go furthest back in wrestling history, you've got the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express. I may have seen matches earlier than this, but there are no teams that stand out to me. These are the first two teams that really stick out in my mind. And then from there, it went to Legion of Doom, Road Warriors, Demolition, the Rockers, all the top teams from that late 1980s, early to mid 1990s that the WWF was pushing at the time. I fell off watching around the Attitude Era. I started watching again in 2014, 2015, really seeing the rise of the Young Bucks on the indies. And FTR is another great modern tag team. I like the Time Splitters that did some time over in Japan. Red Dragon was great. And even though it feels like we're at a slight dip now for tag team wrestling, I feel things could pick back up any moment. So thank you for sitting here and listening to the AI history of wrestling and listening to my own opinions on it. And we're going to move on from here and we are going to go to the modern 531. So thank you for joining us, guys. Enjoy this 531.
Current tag teams. AJ, you love tag team wrestling.
I do. There's so much great tag teams out there right now. I think we've had somewhat of a revival, no pun intended, on the actual rebuilding of tag teams. I think, quite frankly, the WWE still sucks when it comes to tag team wrestling, but the rest of the world is looking incredible.
I have one team from WWE that I put on my list, actually. And we'll talk about that later.
No, I'm intrigued to see. I'm starting off first here with Scott. We have got FTR, Santana and Ortiz, Tetsuya Naito, and Sonata, Jay Lethal and Jonathan Gresham, and the Briscoes. So a good top five there.
Now, Randy Oscar's friend sent us a list. Phil, a.k.a. Nightmare10 on Twitter. He's got the Lucha Bros, Young Bucks, FTR, Jurassic Express, and Pride and Powerful. Santana Ortiz, also known as Pride and Powerful, make the list here as well with the Lucha Bros. And that's an interesting list, though. If you look at that list, all AEW tag teams.
I mean, I know they're going to be coming up soon. I know they're on other lists, but I think it's interesting that thus far, I haven't seen the Young Bucks.
Oh, no, they were the second team mentioned.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear them on his list. Sorry.
But that's
I know they weren't on Scott's. Sorry.
It's funny because if you look at top teams, too, I think you got to include the Young Bucks, say like top current teams. But I kind of went with my favorite personally, just so I kind of make it a little different. And I got to tell you, I didn't put the Bucks on my list either. And I don't hate the Bucks, but they're just not like my favorite tag team. I don't know what it is. I think they're a good team.
Yeah, I don't hate the Bucks either, but you're not going to find them on my list either. We've got Jake St. John. He is Mrs. St. John's second favorite baby boy. We've got the Young Bucks making his list number one. FTR. We've got the Briscoe brothers. We've got John Moxley and Eddie Kingston because he says he loves their friendship, which is cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
The Lucha Brothers. And then because it is Jake St. John, we do have the Jake St. John rule in play here. And with an honorable mention, we've got MSK. He hates the name, but he loves the tag team.
I got Chuck Winchester's list. He's from the Buzz family. He's got RK Bro, New Day, Usos, Lucha Brothers, and Best Friend. Interesting about Chuck's list is a little more heavy WWE. I know he watches WWE, but just in keeping up with AEW, the two teams he picked were Lucha Brothers and Best Friends. So I thought that was
well, here's the interesting thing about the Best Friends is Best Friends 6 months ago would have made my list, but that was when it was Trent and Chuck. Trent is nowhere to be seen right now, and so therefore the Best Friends do not make my list.
Josh DeBoard sent us a list as well. He's got the Usos, RK Bro, MSK, AJ, and Omos, and Imperium.
Oh.
So Imperium I thought was a nice add to that list because, I don't know if they get the credit they deserve. They're technically sound.
Very technically sound, very good tag team, long-time NXT staple now, and NXT UK. Not on my list, but very good team.
I got John White here. He's got the Usos, Lucha Brothers, RK Bro, FTR, Finn Juice, and an honorable mention to Men of the Year and the Good Brothers. Men of the Year.
They're growing on me.
I like them. I like Ethan Page.
I just don't think they've worked as a team enough to actually be on my top five.
That's right. They've been more in angles, and they've been doing single stuff as well.
Let me tell you something. Once again, 6 months ago, I would have gone with the North. So
the North would definitely. Yeah. 1,000%.
So I've got Mrs. St. John's favorite baby boy, Zach St. John, and he went with FTR, the Usos, the Bucks, the Lucha Brothers, and then he finally nailed the team that I'm going to get from NXT. He got the Grizzled Young Vets.
They're another great team out of Europe. Joe sent us a list of himself here. He's got FTR, the Lucha Brothers, Young Bucks, Von Erichs out of GCW, Chris Dickinson, and Starboy Charlie. The Briscoes as an honorable mention. And then we also got a list from Joe's brother, Matt. He's got Lucha Brothers, Young Bucks, RK Bro, Private Party, and FTR. That might be the first list Private Party made.
Yeah, Private Party is an up-and-coming team. I think that they're not even getting enough play in AEW, quite frankly. Right now, I think that the worst thing that happened to them was being aligned with Matt Hardy. I think that they're getting buried in the shuffle, unfortunately, that they focus more on the other tag team, the Butcher and the Blade, that's with Matt Hardy, and I don't think Private Party is getting anywhere near enough play. Also, they are nowhere near as cool as Waves and Curls.
Shout out to Northeast Wrestling's favorite tag team.
I've got Randy Asuka. Now, I love Randy. You know, Randy's one of my biggest fans, and I appreciate that. 2.0.
Yep.
We've got John Moxley and Eddie Kingston, RK Bro, Finn Juice, The New Day, Los Parks, which is a great one. I love that one. Lucha Brothers, Santana Ortiz, and then he actually came back with a number 9. He had actually finished at 8. And came back with a number 9 and actually hit like Jake St. John with MSK.
So interesting on that list that he had, God, I'm blanking out now. Who was the first on his list?
2.0.
2.0, thank you. Yeah.
Which, by the way, I like 2.0.
I love 2.0. I think they're great.
And quite frankly, if we're looking for an old-fashioned tag team similar to the Revival, similar of that nature, 2.0, absolutely adore them. But they're not making my list.
No. I think CM Punk called them the Nasty Boys' little brothers last night.
Well, that's because of the vests.
Yeah.
I actually thought the same thing with the vest. I saw the vest and was like,
I
doing a tribute to the Nasty Boys.
Back. I said something to Scott. Yeah. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. What's going on here? They're growing on me big time.
They wrestle a lot better than the Nasty Boys, so I guess there's that.
Mike Flynn sends me a list. He's got the Bucks, RK Bro, Pride and Powerful, FTR, and MSK. Anybody surprising you that making a lot of lists so far?
No, not really.
I mean,
I'll be honest with you. If anything surprised me, it's Moxley and Kingston, just because I still don't think of them as a team.
No, it's funny. I'm surprised the Usos didn't make more lists. But
I'm a little surprised with the Usos, but in fairness, a lot of our listeners, a lot of our viewers are not necessarily the biggest WWE fans, and I respect the Usos. However, they didn't make my list either.
Well, so I was going to say, too, and you can throw the New Day made some people's list, too.
I can't stand the New Day.
Yeah, well, I think maybe, too, that maybe Usos, the New Day suffer from the same thing. Part of it's our listeners, but also part of it, and maybe they don't have really good teams to feud with anymore.
Well, and that's just it. And when they do go out there, a lot of times they spend as much time now wrestling in singles as they do. If you go past the back the few months, you've seen more of the New Day wrestling singles matches versus people than you have anything else.
Agreed.
I've got Jesse from New Hampshire. Or if you prefer, New Hampshire. Either way, really. We'll go either way. We've got the Bucks, the Lucha Brothers, FTR making another list. It's going to be awful hard to beat them.
Yeah.
Here's one that we haven't seen a lot of yet. Jurassic Express.
Yeah, I think they made one of the lists so far.
Yeah. And then he's got the Usos.
Okay.
They're back.
They're back, baby.
The thing about the tag teams, what we talked about at the beginning of this, is there's so many tag teams right now. Around the world, there's great tag teams. And I'm surprised we're getting as much consistent responses with similar names as we are, considering how many great tag teams there are. One that hasn't made anybody's list yet is the Good Brothers.
Good Brothers. I'm glad you brought that up. Because I got Albert Pettis from the Rockin' Randy's Wrestling Crew. And he's got FTR, the Briscoes, the Good Brothers. And he's got Gorillas of Destiny and the Von Erichs rounding up his top 5.
Dude, love that the Von Erichs finally made a goddamn list. How can you not have the Von Erichs on any list? I was sitting here steaming. Yeah.
Good Brothers finally made a list too. You know, it's interesting. I feel like Young Bucks definitely have come back a little bit now as we start reading this more and more. We're hearing more of them. But man, as we go into the finals here, what have we been hearing most of? FTR.
Santana and Ortiz made a lot of lists.
Yeah, Lucha Bros.
The Briscoes started off strong, but they seem to have fallen off a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like the Bucks finally kind of came back a little bit.
Yeah, if anything, I think the Briscoes and the Bucks have somewhat evened up.
We got 2 more lists. You're next.
Yeah, well, my list is the Lucha Brothers. They did make my list. I've got the Grizzled Young Vets because I think that when it comes to just being a pure tag team, there's none any better out there, quite frankly. I've got the Von Erichs because they're friends of the show and they're also an awesome tag team. Anybody who's watched MLW and doesn't recognize what a great tag team they are, shame on you. Absolutely. And speaking of old school, I've got FTR on mine. What was that, my 4th one? And then my number 5, quite frankly, is the Briscoes. I've always been a fan of the Briscoes. I know some people don't politically like them or what they say and stuff like that, but they're heels, goddammit, and they're supposed to not say popular things. And I love them as a tag team. And quite frankly, they're the tag team that's been together maybe the longest active tag team on this list.
Very possible. Well, Ross and Marshall have been together since birth, but I get what you're saying.
In fairness, the Briscoes are also brothers, and I think they're a lot older than
right.
the Marshalls.
What I was thinking, right? Yeah. And I think they're older, so yeah, they have been together. What the hell am I talking about?
I was ready for that one.
So, yeah, Ross and Marshall, I was saying, tremendous old school team. What I meant by that was they're old school Texas brawling type team. They remind me of their old
They're different from FTR because their teamwork doesn't necessarily flow like the Midnight Express, but when it comes to just straight up old-fashioned Texas-style kick-your-ass brawl, they remind me of Brody and Hanson a little bit, but without the size.
See that?
By the way, I think Tyler Peters had Brody and Hanson on his current tag team list also.
Shout out to Tyler Peters. All right, my final list to wrap us up will be, I got Ross and Marshall as well, former NWA Tag Champs, FTR. They're gonna make my list. I got the Usos. I think they're doing great things with Bloodline with Roman Reigns.
I do like the Usos. It's not anything against them.
No, I know.
I just think right now for just wrestling as a pure tag team, that this is what you get.
They need more teams to compete with too.
Well, they don't have the teams to compete with. They basically have one other team to compete with.
Yeah.
And then they also had the year off where I believe it was Jimmy that was injured for a year. So it's been a while.
Jimmy's also the one who got a little trouble there too.
Yeah, Jimmy also got in trouble there, and then
that hasn't stopped them actually.
in fairness, main event Jey Uso did great as a single. So
funny sidebar too before I finish my list too. Last week when Brock was beating up the Usos in front of Roman, and Roman would come down, he beat up Jimmy, gave him a suplex, and then he goes to suplex Jay, and you see Roman go, "Don't you touch Jay!" So it's like, that's my favorite. Don't you do that. They don't give a shit about Jimmy, but don't you touch Jay.
Don't you touch main event Jey Uso.
Yeah. Finishing up my last 2 teams, I got Mox and Kingston, because like Jay, I like their friendship. I think it's great. And I knew that AJ would really approve of me putting a tag team on because they're friends.
They're not a fucking tag team.
Shout out to Jay.
They're 2 singles wrestlers that are just wrestling together.
They did have a tag title match at one of the pay-per-views against the Bucks. And
okay,
I would say,
fine.
Mustache Mountain. I'm going to run the list. They're not teaming up all the time now.
I know they're not.
Right,
that's why I didn't count them.
But they did team up on this past week's episode or the week before recently. So they had one recently. So I was like, you know what?
I didn't want to take a spot away from teams that are working regularly because and I'm with you. I love Mustache Mountain. I love the way they work. I love everything about them.
Well, hey, I'm the only one to put them down, so they had to get something.
I'm not going to disagree with you. I love the team.
All right, so I think we're going to have to go FTR and Bucks here. And I think maybe round it up with the Briscoes for votes. It was close. It was Briscoes, Lucha, and Pride and Powerful.
See, I like the fact that you're sticking with format and you're sticking with who deserves to be in there. I think that's great. But I'm gonna vote. I'm gonna vote for the Von Erichs.
The Von Erichs, okay.
As the number 3 team.
Well, then we'll just. They're getting booted anyway.
Yeah, they're going out first. Don't get me wrong.
All right.
However, I don't think it matters. Whoever the number 30 team is, is getting booted. So let's just go with the Von Erichs.
Let's tie. We're tied for number 3. They're both getting booted. The Briscoes and the Von Erichs, which would be a great match, by the way.
I would love to see that. You talk about a brawl.
Yeah, let's sign that.
Book that.
Now on this list, I think we're going to be biased here. I know we're going to be biased. The Young Bucks versus FTR. If you go by title credentials, obviously the Bucks have had a little more success in terms of AEW at least, and they never competed in WWE. FTR has held every title in WWE, and they've been AEW tag champs at this point.
They're also managed by Tully Blanchard.
I just think that, and you can argue that obviously the Bucks are in the main event angle and stuff like that, but I just think FTR.
Yeah, you can't really go by who's in the main event angle when one of the two teams is the VPs of the fucking company.
I'll say this too. If you go back to, and I don't know a lot of people talk about this, and I think this was the story. If you go back to when the Bucks were baby faces and they won the tag titles off of FTR, I can't remember which one, jumped off the rope and did attempted a Scorpio splash there, and a 450, and he missed it, and the Bucks
I'll give you a hint. It wasn't Bald Woman.
So my point of this is, to me, that story was very telling because FTR and the Bucks were having this great back and forth match, and then the FTR does something out of their element, decide to go for a high flying, and it costs them. And I thought there was a big part of the story that was never really told. It was that one difference that ended up costing them the match. And my dad, I'm just getting that FTR is such great storytellers. I think they put a lot of this together. I think when you look at the stuff they do, where they pay homage to the Midnight Express, the Hart Foundation, Demolition, Anderson and Tully, I don't know. To me, they're symbolic of what tag team wrestling is, and they're all around great guys. Everything I've heard.
So here's the thing, and AEW, I love AEW. I think that they're doing a great job of utilizing all their talent. They're doing a wonderful job. If there's any place where they've kind of slipped up a little bit, I think they could use FTR even more. So
yeah, no problem with that.
We are not impartial here. We are huge fans of that style of wrestling. We're huge fans of late 80s wrestling, and they bring us back there. And this isn't about what we love. We could easily make it about what we love, but I genuinely believe the best tag team in the world is FTR.
You can't escape. You can't escape. You can't escape.
thank you for watching this episode today. I know it was a longer episode than most because we had those pre-produced videos, and thank you for joining us. We will be back to a regular live show next week, and this is all brought to you by our sponsors.
If you haven't tried Game Up, then you are missing out. Imagine your favorite seltzer and your favorite sports drink had a baby, but it's way better than that. Each can is 110 calories, low carb, 4.9 ABV. It's a nice light drink that is not light on flavor. Game Up comes in fruit punch, orange, lemon, lime, and grape. Pick it up at drinkgameup.com or at your nearest liquor store.
And don't forget about Vinnie Barry and Russellville.
Hey, all you goddamn wrestling fans out there, listen, Old Black Bart has got a book. It's called Wrestle Black Bart. It's got some dadgum good stories in there about some dadgum good wrestlers.
Read stories of Dusty Rhodes, the Von Erich, Scott Casey, Sergeant Slaughter, Roddy Piper, Mr. Fuji, Ron Bass, Bruiser Brody, Mike Davis, the Grappler, and many others.
And I guarantee you one thing, that it'll be the best dadgum read you've had in a long, long time.
Get your book today at Russellville.com or on Amazon. Russellville, it's where wrestling lives.
Read about the Northern Wrestling Federation in the book presented by Russellville.com, The Pro Wrestling Vault, Volume 2. Hear the story of Roger Ruffin, the man who trained Carl Anderson, the Monster Abyss, Jordan Clearwater, Chris Harris, and Jillian Hall.
Plus 45 other short stories, including Jazz, Bobby Eaton, Kamala, Thunder Rosa, Mario Mancini, Scott Casey, PJ Black, Kerry Morton, Sal Renaro, Jeremiah Plunkett, Colby Carino, Bam Bam Malone, and many others.
Get your book today at Russellville.com. Russellville, it's where wrestling lives.